In the heart of Rome, beneath a sky heavy with autumn clouds, St. Peter's Square lay draped in mourning, its ancient marble stones bearing the weight of a grieving world. Thousands had gathered to bid farewell to Pope Francis, their faces etched with sorrow, their voices hushed as the bells of St. Peter's Basilica tolled a solemn requiem. Among the vibrant blue and yellow uniforms of the Swiss Guard, Sergeant Luca Moretti stood vigil, his halberd gleaming faintly, his eyes resolute beneath the brim of his helmet. For those of you who've lived through the trials of war, the quiet devotion of faith, or the steady labor of family life, the Swiss Guard are a symbol of unwavering duty, a reflection of the traditions you've cherished through decades of change. But on this day, an elderly nun, collapsing with a white rose for the Pope, would challenge that duty with a courage so profound, it would move 5 guards to break centuries of protocol and remind us all that mercy is the truest form of honor. Luca Moretti was 30, a seasoned Swiss Guard with 7 years of service, his broad frame filling the Renaissance-era uniform, its stripes a vivid testament to his oath. Born in a small town in Ticino, Switzerland, he had grown up on tales of the Guards' storied history, protectors of the papacy, sworn to silence and sacrifice, their lives bound by a code as enduring as the Vatican itself. To you, who may recall the pride of service, perhaps, in the forces during the Second World War, or in the daily grind of providing for loved ones through post-war austerity, Luca's role was a calling you might understand. His mission at Pope Francis's funeral was clear. Stand still, speak not, uphold the sacred protocol that had guided the Guard for over 500 years. The commander's voice crackled through his earpiece. No movement, no interference, only duty. His halberd, polished to a mirror shine, was an extension of that vow, its weight a reminder of the responsibility he carried. Yet, in the crowd, Sister Magdalena, an 85-year-old nun in a worn black habit, had a mission of her own. Clutching a single white rose, she shuffled forward, her lips whispering prayers, her heart set on honoring the Pope with a gesture tied to a hidden past. Magdalena was frail, her steps unsteady, her face lined with the years of a life spent in quiet service. Her black habit, patched and faded, hung loosely on her thin frame, but her eyes burned with a determination that belied her age. For those of you who've walked through life's hardships, perhaps caring for a family during rationing, or holding fast to faith through loss, Magdalena's resolve might echo your own. She had come alone from a convent in Umbria, her journey funded by the kindness of her sisters, her purpose singular, to place a white rose on the Pope's casket, a symbol of a secret she had carried for decades. The crowd parted slightly as she approached the marble steps leading to the basilica's entrance, their curiosity piqued by the sight of the elderly nun, some filming her on their phones, others whispering in reverence. Magdalena's trembling hands clutched the rose, its petals stark against the gray of the square, her breath shallow, but her spirit unyielding. From his post, Luca saw her, a small figure moving against the tide of mourners, her progress slow but deliberate. His heart quickened, his gloved hand tightening on the halberd's shaft, the cold metal grounding him against a rising tide of instinct. Protocol was absolute. A Swiss Guard was a sentinel, a statue, not a man who could act on feeling. To move, to intervene, was to betray the oath he had sworn in the Sistine Chapel, surrounded by frescoes that seemed to judge his every breath. The commander's voice barked through the earpiece. Hold position. Yet Magdalena's trembling steps, her rose held like a sacred offering, stirred something deep within him, a call that clashed with the rigid code he had lived by. You might recall such moments in your own life when duty and mercy stood at odds, when the rules you followed felt too heavy for the heart's quiet urging. Luca's training was a drumbeat, but Magdalena's courage, her frail form inching closer to the casket's path, was a melody he could not silence. Magdalena reached the sacred line, a boundary marked by tradition, inches from where the Pope's casket would pass. She knelt shakily, her knees protesting, the rose trembling in her hands as she whispered a prayer known only to her. The crowd watched, their murmurs growing, some moved by her devotion, others frustrated by her presence in the procession's path. Luca's pulse thundered, his eyes locked on her, his mind racing. She's too close, he thought, knowing the protocol that forbade interference, even for a nun. The commander's voice crackled again. Hold position. But then, tragedy struck. Magdalena's knees buckled, her frail body collapsing onto the marble steps with a soft cry. The rose slipping from her hand and landing just beyond her reach. The crowd gasped. A wave of shock rippling through the square. A woman shouted, "Help her!" A man hissed, "She's hurt." Murmurs turned to anger, voices rising. Why aren't they moving? She's an old woman. Phones raised, their lenses capturing the scene. The crowd's outrage aimed at the motionless gods. Luca's jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on Magdalena's crumpled form. Her habits played across the stone, her hand reaching weakly for the rose. Protocol chained him, its rules a weight heavier than his halberd. He felt the eyes of the crowd, their judgment pressing against him, and the silent presence of his comrades. Andreas, the youngest at 23, Henri, steady and devout. Matteo, a father of two. Klaus, the veteran whose scars told stories of his own. They stood as one, their faces hidden beneath their helmets. But Luca sensed their shared tension, their own hearts stirred by the sight of the fallen nun. Inside him, a battle raged. He recalled a boyhood vow made in a small church in Ticino, where he had watched Pope Francis. Then a visiting cardinal kneel to bless a beggar. Compassion is our calling, Francis had said, his voice warm, his hands gentle. That moment had shaped Luca, guiding him to the guard, to a life of service. Now, the rose lay on the marble, a silent plea, and Magdalena's faint cry was a summons he could not ignore. Luca's hand moved, almost of its own accord, slipping off his white glove and tucking it into his belt, his eyes fierce with resolve. The gesture was small but seismic, a signal to his comrades that he was ready to act. Andreas caught his eye, his youthful face tightening with determination. Henri nodded subtly, his faith guiding him. Matteo's shoulders squared, his thoughts on his own children. Klaus, the oldest, gave a faint tilt of his head, his scars seeming to soften in the light. Hold position, the earpiece barked, the commander's voice sharp with warning. But Luca's heart spoke louder, its rhythm set by the memory of Francis's words and the sight of Magdalena's rose. The crowd held its breath, sensing a shift, their phones still raised, their voices falling silent. In a heartbeat, Luca broke rank, his boot echoing on the marble, a sound that seemed to ripple through the square. He strode forward, Ace, halberd, steady, his purpose clear. Andreas followed, his youth no barrier to his courage. Henri came in next, his steps measured but firm. Matteo and Klaus joined, their halberds lowered, their faces solemn but resolute. 5 guards moved as one, a breach of protocol so bold it stunned the square into silence. Dignitaries in black suits frowned, their murmurs of disapproval drowned by the crowd's gasps. A priest in the front row nodded in awe, his hands clasped in prayer. Phones captured the moment, their flashes like sparks in the dusk, destined to light up the world. Luca knelt beside Magdalena, removing his other glove, his bare hands gentle as he cradled her frail form. "Sister, we're here," he whispered, his voice steady despite the weight of his choice. Andreas knelt beside him, his young face etched with concern, while Henri retrieved the rose, placing it back in Magdalena's trembling hand. Matteo stood watch, his presence a shield against the crowd's press, and Klaus draped his ceremonial cloak over her, its blue and yellow folds a warm embrace against the cold marble. Magdalena's eyes fluttered open, her breath shallow, but her gaze clear. The rose glowing in her hand like a beacon. The crowd erupted in soft cheers, some sobbing, others clapping, their anger replaced by awe. Maria, a woman in the crowd who had shouted for help, wept, her hands clasped in gratitude. The priest raised his hands, as if blessing the scene. And a child in the crowd whispered, "They're heroes." The casket passed, its golden cloak a fleeting glimpse. But the moment belonged to Magdalena, to the guards, to the mercy that had triumphed over tradition. The guards lifted Magdalena gently, carrying her to a Vatican cloister, where a physician waited, summoned by the priest's quick call. In the quiet of the cloister, surrounded by ancient stone and the scent of incense, Magdalena lay on a cot, her breathing faint but steady. Luca knelt beside her, his halberd resting against the wall, his hands still bare from the gloves he had shed. Father Banadetto, an elderly priest with a shock of white hair, approached, his eyes widening as he recognized her. "Sister Magdalena," he gasped, his voice trembling. "She saved Jews in the war, hid them in her convent's cellar." One was a boy, a seminarian who became Pope Francis. The guards stood stunned, their faces a mix of reverence and disbelief. A flashback played in their minds. Young Magdalena, her habit crisp in the 1940s, smuggling bread to a hidden cellar, whispering comfort to a frightened boy who would one day wear the papal tiara. For the boy who cried in the cellar, Magdalena murmured, her voice weak but clear, the rose still in her hand, its petals a testament to her courage. The revelation rippled through the cloister, the physician pausing, the priest crossing himself, the guards exchanging glances that spoke of their shared awe. Luca's heart swelled, the weight of their choice now clear. They had not just saved a nun, but honored a heroine whose life had shaped the pope they mourned. Magdalena stirred, her eyes meeting Luca's, a faint smile touching her lips. "You saw me," she whispered, her words a gift. Luca nodded, his throat tight. "We all did, sister," he said. "And we always will." The rose, now tucked into her habit, seemed to glow, a symbol of a past that had come full circle. A life of quiet heroism, acknowledged in the Vatican's Sacred Heart. The guards returned to their posts, but the square was changed, the crowd's energy softer, their faces lit with inspiration. News of the moment spread like wildfire. Phones carrying the story across the globe, headlines in London, Manchester, and beyond. Swiss guards, honor vous héroïne at Pope's funeral, a nun's rose, a guard's mercy. Social media buzzed, with British viewers posting, "This is the faith I grew up with." They showed us what the church should be. Letters began to arrive at the Vatican, thousands of them, from children who drew pictures of the guards and the rose, from veterans who saw in Magdalena their own wartime courage, and from pensioners like you, who wrote of moments when compassion had guided them through hardship. One letter from a retired teacher in Cornwall. "Read, I nursed my brother through his final days, and your act reminded me why I never gave up. God bless you." Another, from a Birmingham parish, said, "You honored a woman who saved lives, just as we strive to honor those we've lost." The next day, Luca and his comrades, Andreas, Henry, Matteo, Klaus stood before the Swiss Guard Council in a dim chamber, the air thick with the scent of old wood and wax. Cardinal Severino, a figure of quiet authority, sat at the table's head, his red sash a stark contrast to the officers' stern uniforms. The commander, his face a mask of discipline, spoke first. "You broke protocol," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You moved without orders, in front of the world, at the Holy Father's funeral. You risked the guard's honor. Explain yourselves." Luca stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes steady. "We honored mercy," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "Sister Magdalena deserved our help, not our silence. Compassion is the Pope's legacy, and we chose to live it." Andreas nodded, his youth no barrier to his conviction. Henry spoke of faith, Matteo of family. Klaus of Sacrifice. The rose, now placed on the table before the council, seemed to glow, a silent witness to their choice. Cardinal Severino leaned forward, his eyes searching their faces, his voice gentle but weighty. "You speak of compassion," he said, "and you embodied it. Sister Magdalena's life saved the man who became our Pope. And your act saved her story from fading. The church is not its rules, but its heart." The commander's jaw tightened, but his eyes softened, a grudging respect breaking through. "Your act has redefined service," he said. "It has shown the world the Guard's soul, but it cannot go unmarked. Your records will carry this moment, a caution and a tribute." The council's decision was unprecedented. No dismissal, no formal punishment, only a note in their files, a mark that was both warning and honor. The guards stood taller, their bond forged in that moment on the marble steps, their purpose renewed. At the funeral's close, as the final prayers echoed through St. Peter's, a simple oak chair was placed near the altar, adorned with Magdalena's rose and a papal ribbon, marked with the words, "Protector of the Innocent." The crowd rose, some sobbing, others bowing their heads, inspired by the nun, whose courage had spanned decades, and the gods who had honored it. Men removed their hats, children stared in awe, and dignitaries whispered of a moment that would change the Vatican. Luca and his comrades stood guard, their swords raised in a silent salute, their faces proud but humble. The rose, now a symbol of Magdalena's legacy, was carried to her convent in Umbria, where her sisters wept and prayed, their voices lifted in gratitude for the gods who had seen her. Luca returned to his duties, forever changed. The rose's image lingered in his mind, tucked into his uniform as a pressed petal, a reminder of the nun who had taught him to listen to his heart. His comrades carried their own reminders. Andreas, a renewed sense of purpose. Henri, a deeper faith. Matteo, a vow to teach his children compassion. Klaus, a peace that softened his scars. The Vatican felt the ripple of their act, a new training for the God. Now emphasized mercy, a quiet revolution inspired by 5 men and a rose. Church groups across the UK held services in Magdalena's honor, their pews filled with pensioners like you, who saw in her a reflection of their own wartime resilience, their own quiet acts of kindness through years of hardship. A parish in Sussex launched a charity, Magdalena's Rose, to support elderly nuns, its funds growing with donations from those moved by the story. News of the Guards' Act spread globally, touching millions. British headlines read, "Swiss Guards save pauvre heroine, a nun's courage, a guard's heart." Social media posts from UK viewers echoed the sentiment. "This is the church I love. They honored a woman who saved lives, just as we honor our own heroes." Letters continue to arrive, filling the Vatican's offices, their words a testament to the power of compassion. A veteran from Leeds wrote, "I hid a friend from conscription in 43, and your act reminded me why I risked it." A grandmother in Kent shared, "I cared for my sister through polio, and your rose is her rose." The story became a beacon, a reminder that faith is not in standing still, but in reaching out, in seeing those who need to be seen. In the golden glow of a Roman sunset, St. Peter's Square remains a place of pilgrimage, its guards standing vigil as they have for centuries, their halberds catching the light, their silence a vow. But Luca's story, and Magdalena's, lives on, a spark for those who believe in the power of mercy to transcend even the oldest traditions. For you, who've lived through decades of change, through the ration books of the post-war years, the joy of family milestones, the sorrow of loved ones lost this tale is a call to remember the moments that define us. Perhaps it's a time you broke a rule to help someone, A neighbor you fed during a strike. A stranger you comforted during a blackout. A child you lifted when they fell. Maybe it's a memory from the war. When you shared your last cigarette with a comrade. Or a moment at home when you held a loved one's hand through pain, knowing it was enough to be there. Magdalena's Rose and Luca's Choice invite you to share those stories with your children, your grandchildren, your friends at the community center. Write them in a letter. Tell them over a cup of tea. Let them live on in the quiet spaces where memories are kept, in a world that often feels hurried and divided. This story reminds us that compassion is our true duty, that a single act of heart can echo through time, touching lives we may never know. What act of mercy has moved you? Perhaps it's a moment when you chose kindness over convention, when you saw someone who needed to be seen, when you reached out despite the cost. Share it, whether in a whispered conversation or a note to a loved one, and let it be a spark that lights the way for others. For compassion conquers tradition, and Magdalena's legacy, like Pope Francis's, shines on, a light for us all.